and you should see a symbol once we go live.
He working this board.
All right, folks, I do believe that we are live. So I would like
Kathy.
to welcome everyone to the Green Party of Florida 2020 primary. We are going to be kicking off our primary season with a presidential forum. So my name is Lebeau Kpadenou. I am the male co-chair of the Green Party of Florida. I'm going to explain to you a little bit about our primary process up front, and then we will get to talking to our candidates. This year, we will be holding an online primary. This party is made up entirely of volunteers. Nobody gets paid, and the state does not assist us in the primary process like they do with the big parties. So we've been forced to handle the system as best we can. We've built what we believe to be a robust online voting system, working with a battle-tested software called OpaVote. And the process will work in two phases. First of all, we will need to register you as a eligible Green Party voter. You'll need to be registered as a Green Party member in the state of Florida by May 5th of this year. You've got a couple of days from now. Once you've done that, you can go to gpfl.org/vote. And there you'll find a form. The form will ask you a few questions, including your date of birth and your voter ID number. That will be fed into an automated system that we've built that will check those pieces of information to make sure that you are registered to vote, and then you'll receive an email from us with your voting code and address on where you can go and cast your ranked choice vote. If technical difficulties arise, which we expect they will, then we do have all the capabilities we need to do these things by hand. But if something breaks largely, then it may reduce the amount of time, it may increase the amount of time it takes for us to get back to you with your votes. The voting period is kicking off now, so you can go to gpfl.org/vote at any point that you care to. Between now and May 30th, we're running a 4-week primary. I will be giving you all this information again, and we will make sure that that information goes up into the description box below the videos. And so now I'm going to hand it over to my co-host, Robin Harris. Robin, let me get you up front here. All right, Robin.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Lebeau, for that information, and hope everyone's had a chance to kind of process that so that you can continue in this. And so before I go any further, I want to give a big shout out to our co-chair and all of those who have been on this planning committee. You guys have done an excellent job with the whole COVID experience. We had to redo things in a short amount of time to make this virtual process happen. And I want to give out just many kudos for all the hard work that you guys have done. So the reason we're here today is to have conversation with our candidates, Mr. Howie Hawkins and Dario Hunter, we'll talk to later. And so I want to welcome Howie Hawkins, and I want to give him time to take about a minute or two to tell us a little bit about himself. There's a lot to tell, but if he can just share a little bit, and then we'll go a little bit further. Mr. Hawkins.
Well, hi, Florida. I wish I could be there with you, but this coronavirus situation, we got to do it this way. I'm a retired Teamster construction worker before that, but been an activist since the 1960s, civil rights, anti-war, ecology, and became committed at that time as a teenager that we need a party for working class people that's committed to participatory democracy, or what we call grassroots democracy now, democratic socialism and ecology. And so I supported third party politics in the 60s, the Peace and Freedom Party, peace in Vietnam. Freedom was a civil rights slogan. 1968, then the People's Party, which incorporated peace and freedom and a lot of independent progressive state parties in 72 and 76. 1980 was the Citizens Party, our foremost environmental scientist at that time. Barry Commoner was the presidential candidate. And then I got invited to the first national organizing meeting because I've been involved in the anti-nuclear movement, the Clanshell Alliance out in New Hampshire. And we had a meeting in St. Paul, Minnesota, August 1984. And I said, and we agreed that we can't build this out of a presidential campaign. We got to go out and organize local groups, get involved in local politics, and build this from the bottom up. And we proceeded to do that. And by 1996, Ralph Nader let us use his name on the ballots for president. We got on over 30 ballots. And then in 2000, he ran an active campaign, and we became a national, people knew about us across the country. So I stayed involved with the Greens ever since. The Greens in New York have run me 3 times for governor. Each time we got enough votes to get a ballot line for New York. And I'm running for president because a lot of Greens asked me to. And took a minute to persuade me, but I got in last May 28th, and I'm going all out, and I probably used up my minute or 2. So I'll stop there.
It's okay. Thank you, Howie, for that. I'm glad folks got a chance to hear a little bit more about you. And we have compiled questions for you, and hopefully this can kind of be more conversational, where it won't sound like I'm being robotic or anything. We have compiled questions. Some of those questions did come from within Florida. Some of them are from other folks that are probably new to the party. So I'm going to try my best to give you as many as possible. And I think each candidate has about 30 minutes. Someone will pull my virtual coattail if we've gone over time or need to do something different. But first question is kind of like what we started talking about at first. The reason why we're doing this whole virtual process is because of COVID-19. The first question is around that. This has been the most bizarre thing that I've seen in my lifetime, and it has impacted us in so many ways. And so the first question is centered around that. It came from me because I want to hear what a Green Party person as president would do, because we're not getting the answers that we need. Everything is chaotic. So COVID-19 has killed approximately, when I first wrote this question, I had 60,000 people, but this morning I think we're almost about 67. COVID-19 has killed approximately 67,000 Americans. The fatality has been global. What step would you take in investigating this pandemic as president?
Well, I put out a whole program, and I don't know if I can remember all the things I said. We need to demand, and we need to demand them now, because Trump is totally inept. He's blown the whole thing, and Biden is AWOL. He's got the megaphone, the platform, and where is he making the demands of what we need, which are obvious? Medicare should cover treatment as well as testing for people sick with this. I got a sister in Orangeburg, South Carolina, that's dealing with the COVID right now, and she's having, sweating, how's she gonna pay for it? Should deal with all emergency services. Medicare should do that now. The Defense Production Act should be used to produce the medical supplies, the PPE, and all the things that the healthcare system need, and line up the supply chains for that and get it distributed. And then it should do the testing, contact tracing, and isolation we need to do to be able to go back out there safely. It's not being done. There's a whole vacuum there. It's an opportunity for the Greens to speak up. We need a moratorium on evictions, foreclosures, and utility shutoffs. We need to cancel rent, mortgage, and utility payments and have the federal government pay that. And it's important that they do, so these small landlords, credit unions, community land trusts, housing cooperatives, small businesses that depend on the housing industry don't go broke. Half the jobs in this country are people are employed in small businesses. Most of those small businesses don't have a month's worth of cash reserves. You run out of cash in your small business, you're dead. And those jobs are gone, and they're going right now. So that program, Ilhan Omar has a bill that would do that. We need to get cash to people. That $1,200 ain't enough. $2,000 per adult, $500 per child for the duration of the crisis. We need OSHA. We need a temporary standard to ensure that workers have personal protection equipment and that it's enforced. And so those are some of the immediate things that a president could do, or push Congress where it needs legislation. Now, the San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank just came out with a study comparing recovery from wars versus depression, pandemics over 600 years. And after wars, we destroy a lot of capital stock because we blow stuff up. And rebuilding that gets the economy going. After pandemics, so much of the economic organization, even the labor, is missing. The average recovery stagnation is 40 years. So the answer to that is what we've been talking about for the last decade in the Green Party, a Green New Deal. And I have a budget on my webpage for an eco-socialist Green New Deal at howiehawkins.us. You can look at it. But the way we costed it out, and the jobs would be created, 38 million jobs. And before the coronavirus, we thought the labor was the bottleneck. The technology's there, the money can be had. Now we need to put people back to work and basically recycle the old production systems and rebuild new ones that are powered by clean energy, are carbon zero or negative, and have zero waste to deal with the other environmental problems that waste is creating, like plastics. And finally, we need to demand this. This has got to be done in the next few weeks. We got to have universal mail-in ballots. So this election, people have access to it in the fall. And I expect we'll still be in this COVID situation, it's going to depress the vote, and that is the last thing we need. So there's a lot, and this is a real vacuum in leadership of the two-party system.
Absolutely. Thank you. You were talking about the environment, which kind of is a good segue for some other questions. Robert Austin of Tampa, he asked, in Florida, we've had a lot of problems with agriculture runoff causing red tide or other algae blooms. What do you propose to protect ecosystems and protect farmer rights?
Okay, part of the Green New Deal that I'm advocating is a transformation of agriculture from corporatized, industrialized, chemicalized agriculture to regenerative organic agriculture. And it provides for subsidizing farmers as they make the transition. It calls for eliminating corporate farming, absentee ownership. The farmers should own the land they work on. A lot of them are becoming tenant farmers to these absentee owners. And so we got to get rid of all the biocides. That helps rebuild the soils, which brings carbon out of the atmosphere. And then we should provide parity pricing for all agricultural commodities. Parity pricing just means that the floor price goes up with when the costs of production go up. So farmers at least recover their production costs, plus enough to make a modest standard of living as a floor. We also need supply management so that we don't have gluts in some commodities and not enough in others. And these would cover not just the usual things we subsidize, like cotton, corn, and soy, but all the fruits and vegetables, all the grains, and the dairy products. So, we also need a new homesteading program, because the estimates are we need about 1 million more farmers, because regenerative organic agriculture is more labor intensive. So we got to help people get on the farms. A lot of these people are farm workers. They're immigrants. They used to be farmers from Mexico and Central America. I work with the Workers Center up here in Central New York, and these are the people that are, working the dairy farms and picking the fruits and vegetables. And their dream is to become a farmer here. And there's an opportunity, because with the corporatization of the farms, these combined animal feed organizations, these massive dairy operations, the kids of the farmers that have had those farms for a few generations, they're looking for other work. So these immigrants are ready to take it. And I think the homesteading program we need to get new farmers on the land will help these immigrants, realize their dream, which is to become farmers.
Okay, thank you. We have another environmental question from Joni, and I hope I pronounce her. She's a lovely soul. Joni Levinus from our Facebook group. She says and asks, I believe every green should watch the movie Planet of the Humans. And so she'd love to hear, Howie, what you think in terms of our own eco-socialist Green New Deal.
I haven't had an opportunity to watch the film. I just read a review by one of the fellow Greens here in New York, and was actually hoping to meet Michael Moore. There's a Green running, he's run many times. He was on the county board, Bill Maher, up there in Traverse City, where Moore has a second home. So maybe at some point when we get this lockdown, I'll get up there and, give him my review of the film. My plan is to watch it tomorrow, actually. But in terms of eco-socialist Green New Deal, I'm saying eco-socialist because we can't do this with just, a carbon tax and some standards and incentives and mandates, because the vested industries will fight us and gum it up. We need to do like we did during World War II, when the federal government in that emergency took over a quarter of the manufacturing capacity of this country. They just took the plants from GM and Ford and so forth, and they built some. And they did that in order to turn industry on a dime into what they called the arsenal of democracy, which armed the US, the UK, and Russia to defeat the Nazis. And we need to do the same kind of thing to defeat climate change. So we're talking about a public energy system. The utilities, the generators, the power generators, and the fuel companies, Exxon, Chevron, the Koch brothers, because they're not going to reinvest their earnings in renewables. They're going to go for more oil and gas. We can't have that, because we will be using fossil fuels even during a rapid transition. So those earnings should go into renewables. We need it in the transportation sector. We need to rebuild the light rails, the trolleys that every city had between the 1890s and 1930s in this country. That's not rocket science. We need to build bullet trains between the cities like all the other advanced countries have. These are all electrified, so they're more energy efficient, can be powered by wind and solar. And then freight rails. We need to electrify them, densify them, and get the freight off the roads onto the rails for most of the intermediate and long range transportation. So, and we should incorporate the airlines in there so we can coordinate scheduling, because bullet trains will reduce the need for short and intermediate range air travel. And finally, manufacturing, because here are the production systems that we got to transform. We can't do coke ovens for steel. We got to do electric arc furnaces. We can't do the cement we're doing with calcium carbonate poured in there. The calcium hardens it, and the carbonate evaporates in the atmosphere. When it's heated up, it's 5% of the world's carbon footprint. There are other ways of making cement. So we got to replace these old factories with new ones that are not only 100% clean energy, but also zero waste, so that all materials are recycled. They're not dumped into the environment. That reduces the need to extract things from the earth and put things back into the earth where it causes pollution. So that's why we need to do this through the public sector in order to coordinate and plan a rapid transition. We're calling for 100% clean energy and zero to negative greenhouse gas emissions and zero waste by 2030. And that's what the climate science carbon budgets say rich countries like the United States got to do. And this is also the way we're going to recover the economy now that it's flat on its back.
Thank you. Thank you. I wasn't aware of the movie Planet of the Humans, but it seems pretty interesting. So, kind of change the tone a little bit. We have some questions concerning women's rights. So, Wendy Stimler of Melbourne, here in Florida, asked, now that Virginia has become the 38th state to ratify the ERA, what do you see as a path forward for women's rights, and what would you do as president to ensure gender equality?
Well, we need to get ERA over the finish line. That will give women a constitutionally enforceable right to get justice through the legal system. We need to enforce the laws we got. And there's lax enforcement in the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and at every level in enforcing equal pay for equal work. With regard to women's right to choose and get an abortion if they so choose, we need to codify Roe v. Wade in legislation, because we got to protect those rights from the Supreme Court, which is, as now constituted, may take those rights away. And then there was the, what they call it, the gag order that Trump put forward, where providers that get federal funding, like Planned Parenthood, are not supposed to talk about the option of abortion, and that's got to be repealed. So I think those are some of the leading things. And then, we got to push within our movements, particularly the labor movement, to pay more attention to this issue of equal pay for equal work and equal opportunity to advance, in job ladders.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I spent some time in Tallahassee, our capital, and it almost appears as though there's this there were so many bills, packages of bills that were really anti-women or anti-women rights. So I like those suggestions that you have. Another question that we have, I'm not sure what they're getting at, but I'm going to ask it underneath this platform. Clark from Ybor City asks, what are the most important qualities you are looking for in a running mate, and will you have specific tasks and responsibilities laid out for them? Maybe she's edging that you should get a woman vice president.
I will be shortly announcing a female African-American veteran working class socialist activist as my running mate, who's substantially younger than me. So it diversifies the ticket demographically. And the qualities that I looked for was, first of all, somebody that knows what they're talking about, knows the issues, somebody who has experience in campaigning for these issues that we're talking about, somebody who can speak in a way that plain people can understand and believe. And I believe I've found that running mate. And we're just putting a package together, and I wish I could have told you who it was today, but you know how these things leak out, so it's coming soon.
It's not me, guys. It's not me. Okay.
It could have been you, but it's not you. We'll do that much.
Okay.
We'll say that much.
All right. Thank you, Howie. We look forward to your announcement. This should be it sounds very exciting. So there's a question from YouTube, and I almost missed it. And they're trying really hard to make sure that I get these questions. I appreciate that, guys. Nick from Florida, how will you get your name into the mass media? Very good question.
And well, okay, that goes to party building. The mass media is not even going to pay attention to us unless we're on most or all the ballots. And we're putting a lot of effort in my campaign to getting on all 51 ballots, 50 states and DC, and the territory of Guam, which has a advisory vote. And, you know, for example, we just committed $10,000 to the petition in Alaska, where they don't have a shutdown and we haven't got relief from the state government. Now we have a team of lawyers going to state governments asking for relief in this coronavirus environment. So we just won a court case in Illinois where the Greens got on the ballot. And our argument is we've been on the ballot many presidential election cycles. We can't physically petition, put us on. And we won. The state government didn't do it, but the courts did. And, you know, there's like 26 more states, and we're on DC, so 26 more states, and they're in various states of process right now, but we're putting a big commitment in that. So we get on the ballot. We're about to qualify for federal matching funds, which will double all contributions under $250. And I think Florida's qualified. I'm not sure about that, but we need 20 states with $5,000 or more contributions from individuals of $250 or less. And we made great progress in the last month on that, partly because a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters are coming our way. So that's to like establish us as a serious campaign. And then, you know, our strategy is to have a regular conversation with the political reporters around the country, regular news releases. I got the angle of being the original Green New Dealer. I was the first candidate in this country to campaign for a Green New Deal. It's a topic of conversation till this coronavirus, but, you know, I think, and we've, you know, been probing and there's interest. And I have got some coverage, and I'm starting to get covered, you know, the Washington Times, Washington Examiner, Washington Post, New York Post, Economist, you know, other publications. So I think we can break through, and that's how we got to do it. We got to present them with an interesting story addressing issues. You know, I talk about the climate crisis, the 3 life or death issues, the climate crisis, inequality, because inequality kills. Working class life expectancies are declining. They call them deaths of despair. People got to choose between rent and going to the doctor. And that affects about half the population. So that's where we have an economic bill of rights to end poverty and economic despair. And then the new nuclear arms race, which, you know, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists just moved their doomsday clock closer to midnight because we're getting out all the treaties. The last bilateral treaty between the US and Russia on strategic arms expires next February 5th. There are no negotiations going on. We're modernizing our forces. So is Russia, so is China now. And what we need are nuclear disarmament initiatives to reduce the tensions so we can go to the world's nuclear powers and say we want complete mutual nuclear disarmament. So I'm calling for a pledge of no first use, unilateral disarmament to a minimum credible deterrent, military spending cuts on the order of 75%, withdrawing our troops from these 7 official wars and over 800 military bases, and then going to these countries on the basis of those tension reducing initiatives and saying, let's disarm. And there were 122 nations agreed to a treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons in July 2017. The International Campaign for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons got the Nobel Peace Prize for that. Hardly anybody in this country knows that. This is an issue that our campaign, and I hope all the Greens running at every level, bring to our attention, to the public attention, to the media attention, because it's a life or death issue.
Okay, thank you. A lot of conversation, and that it brings up a lot of other topics. But I want to scale back. A question that this question is actually from me. It kind of takes a little chop at Joe Biden, the Democrats, and but it's dealing with mass incarceration and drugs. So in 1986, a drug bill instituted different sentencing guidelines for 2 different forms of the same drug, cocaine. Could you talk about cocaine sentencing disparities and how you would and what you would do to handle this?
Well, Joe Biden has a lot of responsibility for that. And he has never led a fight for a progressive reform, but he has postured on law and order back then in the 90s and the disparity between crack and powder cocaine, which disproportionately affected Black and brown communities because the crack was cheaper. And that's what the drug cartels marketed in those communities. And mass incarceration has devastated particularly poor communities of color. And we need to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission so that these communities can say, here's what happened to us, here's how we need reparations to make things better. So I'm for, in the case of marijuana, just legalizing it federally and taxing and regulating it. And for the hard drugs, decriminalizing personal possession for personal use. Portugal did that, and then they provide legal, medical, and social support. And what they did that in 2001, and incarceration's gone way down. Overdoses have pretty much been eliminated. The crime associated with the drug traffic has been radically reduced. And they actually have less people using hard drugs because they get help. They get reference to a job, or they get drug treatment, or they get counseling to help them deal with whatever their issues were. And they were using drugs to cope with. So I think, and then as far as incarceration, I mean, right now, our prisoners, as well as our immigrants in the detention camps, are sitting ducks for COVID. In some of these prisons, we already know there's an epidemic. There's about 75% of those prisoners who can be released right now because they're elderly, they're no threat to public safety. A lot of them are in jails waiting for trial, for nonviolent offenses. You got hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of nonviolent drug offenders. All these folks should be released just for public health reasons, and then services provided to them so they can, get settled and get the medical help they need. And that goes for the migrant families. They need to be reunited. We need to open the borders for all those migrant families that are camped out on the border on the Mexican side. I mean, that is creating a huge, you were mentioning all the people that have been dying from the COVID virus. There's a lot more of people that are, and it's the prisoners and the migrants that are the most vulnerable, along with the elderly in their homes. So, those group homes. So, I think the way to reduce mass incarceration right now is to release a lot of people who are no threat to public safety.
All right, thanks. So I want to I'm not sure where we are on time. I'm sure they'll let me know soon, but and we have lots of questions, which is good. But United States Constitution, this is a question from Joel Fears from Volusia County. He says, Congress gives up its constitutional powers as each consecutive president from, he names different presidents. Example, Clinton declares war in Serbia. Trump's contempt of, sorry about that.
Contempt of Congress.
Yeah, I want to ask his exact question. My page jumped. So he asked, will you as president, after you take the oath of office, give back the constitutional powers to Congress?
Yeah, I absolutely favor that. As a footnote, the odds of me becoming president are low, but we need to keep demanding in the streets, mass nonviolent direct action to the extent we can in this COVID crisis. The issues we put forward in the campaign. I mean, I'm asked, what am I gonna do my first 100 days? That's probably what I'll be doing or preparing to do when we can go back out safely. But yes, Congress should have the war power back and they should exercise it. They should not avoid it, which is what they've been doing. They want to put it on the president so they don't have to take responsibility for sending our young people off to die in wars we shouldn't be fighting. They need to take the money power back. I mean, the Green Party is unique in this country, and there's only one other party in the world, it's the Green Party in England and Wales, that is saying we should get rid of the Federal Reserve, we should stop making money when banks extend credit, and it should be done by a monetary authority in the Treasury. Greenbacks, which was how we helped fund the Civil War, is what the populists demanded in the late 19th century when there was deflation and it was killing the farmers and even industrialists that had to borrow to get their businesses up and running. And so that's a power that's right there. Congress has the power to coin money, and the courts have said that includes all money, paper money, digital money, whatever you want. And the contempt of Congress, I think he was getting at. I mean, my God, Congress is getting, you know, they're getting mugged by Trump. And Pelosi obstructed impeachment. Let's be clear about that. Trump has a rap sheet a mile long. And they waited until this Ukraine attempted extortion by Trump. And then when they prosecuted, it wasn't abuse of power and contempt of Congress so much as they made it a national security issue. Like the biggest thing about it was we didn't get the arms to Ukraine in that proxy war. So, you know, Pelosi avoided it, and Trump is the most impeachable president we've had in history. And, you know, right now, like the administration just said they're not going to let Dr. Fauci testify to the House committee. You know, where the hell is Congress? They're on vacation till May 4th in the midst of this pandemic. So it's more than what we do for president. Let me say this, the way we're going to build the Greens into a major party and force in American politics is from the bottom up, electing thousands of people as we go into the 2020s, the local office. We do that, then we're credible for state office in Congress. We need to get Greens in Congress, because even the progressives, they defer to the corporate leadership. You know, the corporate leadership likes the progressives to make speeches. It draws progressives in. But the corporate Democrats make the decisions. And I'll stop there. I could give you chapter and verse with AOC, you know, one of our New York reps, but I'll leave it there.
Yeah, and I think it's important what you said to kind of piggyback. It's important that as Greens that we champion them to try to obtain more seats in Congress, House, and Senate. That way, we'll begin to have more power over legislation, because this is a debacle what's going on. So my page is jumping which is good. We have questions, more questions coming in. I want to make sure that that I get those that have been waiting. So Otis B in Illinois, in Illinois from our Facebook group asked, and I like these type of questions, as everyone knows, what is your Black agenda? And I think that's a good question, because during the debates, the Democrats did a poor job on putting on any type of Black agenda. Some folks would say that Bernie Sanders probably came closest to having one, but I like specifics. So, Mr. Hawkins, what is your Black agenda?
Well, the first thing is we got to enforce the anti-discrimination laws on the book. And the laws against segregation in schools and housing. Our communities are now more segregated by race as well as class, which largely overlap, than we were when the Fair Housing Act passed in 1968. And both parties have been AWOL on this. The Republicans kind of race bait, the Democrats avoid the whole issue. So that's something that the federal government can provide leadership on. And then we got to deal with reparations, which people think is all about slavery. It is, but it's also about the fact that Black America lost half its wealth during the Obama administration. because those corporate criminals that stole Black and brown people's homes were not prosecuted. They were too big to jail, as the Wall Street Journal summarized Eric Holder's answers to a Senate hearing in the beginning of the second Obama administration. So those corporate criminals are now running the Commerce Department, Wilbur Ross, and the Treasury Department, Steve Mnuchin. They were in the middle of predatory lending and foreclosures and the robo-signing, which was computerized fraud to steal people's homes. So there's reparations. You can forget the previous, 400 years and just deal with the last decade. So Black America's wealth is about 1/10 per household of white America. So reparations, I think what we need to do is pass the bill to study reparations, because the African American community needs to come to consensus on what they want from it. Some reparations should be individual so that Black households have some resources to get a better start. Maybe they need a home, maybe whatever they need it for. So they have more personal wealth, but also collective reparations. Because if you just give money into a system riddled with institutional racism and capitalist exploitation, that cash is going to end up in the hands of the same wealthy elite. So we need institutional change, which is what James Foreman, who started the modern reparations movement when he went to Riverside Church and said the churches and synagogues should fund Black newspapers, radio stations, TV stations, and a research institute, so that African American community could come together, get informed, and formulate, the demands and campaigns they wanted to do. So it's got to be a combination of collective and individual reparations. The next step is to study that. So I think those are some of the central things that I would put forward for Black America. Another thing that we advocate is proportional representation in legislative bodies. And we know from around the world where you have proportional representation instead of plurality winner from single member districts, ethnic minorities get their fair share of representation and power. So that's another reform that I think speaks directly to Black America. And then finally, this economic Bill of Rights. When King went to the March on Washington, everybody knows about the I Have a Dream part, which he only did, as he lived, which is something he'd always done when Mahalia Jackson said, tell him about the dream, Martin. But his prepared speech talked about, we come here for a promissory note. And they're telling us there's insufficient funds, but we don't believe that. And that was to say that we need an economic Bill of Rights funded by the federal government to jobs, an income above poverty, decent housing, healthcare, and education. And A. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin and Martin Luther King and those people said, the way we're going to defeat the white backlash, which was mounting at that time, Goldwater on the Republican side, the Dixiecrats on the Democratic side, was that the civil rights movement, as it went from civil rights to human rights, would have to lead a movement for the economic rights for all, to undermine the material basis for white anxiety that was being mobilized by this white backlash. And we need that now more than ever, because the white backlash is in the White House. So I think that's part of what speaks to the needs of Black America. And when you look at the polls, people say, we need healthcare, we need jobs, we need better schools. And that's what that economic Bill of Rights addresses.
Thank you. In the way of equality or equity, there's a question, another constitutional question, somewhat. Eric Martinez, he's also this is from our Facebook page. It's kind of, I think I know what he's asking. I'll try to just ask how he's asking it, but it's a little lengthy. If a disabled person claims he is not disabled, would you believe him or let him prove his ability through hard work or honest work? If he does successful work and study, would that be good enough to get rid of his disability status and grant him equal rights and the right to work? If he shows he cares about his duty to people, planet, and peace. I guess he wants to know what your thoughts around that would be.
Well, if somebody feels disadvantaged by a disability label they don't deserve, they should have every right to get rid of that label, no doubt. And I would just say, with respect to people who do have disabilities, that we got to do a lot in terms of housing, the enforcement of the Americans with Disabilities Act, so people can be mobile, With respect to housing, I'm calling for 25 million units of public housing over the next 10 years to deal with the affordability housing crisis, but also provide decent living for people with disabilities, not having them segregated into special homes, but as part of public housing developments that are also not just for poor people of color in the worst part of town, but for everybody. So like in Europe, you have professionals, working class people, and poor people living in public housing developments. And that reduces segregation as well as provides affordable housing. And then in employment, people who are disabled often get exploited and they're not well represented. So that sometimes they're doing piecework and getting below minimum wage. Sometimes their wages are stolen. There's a lot of abuse going on there, and that needs to be addressed. And not to speak of wage theft, which is another big problem.
Okay, thank you. On that same note, James Felon from Duval County, question from our Facebook page as well. How do you think we should go about protecting LGBT plus refugees and immigrants on our southern border from acts of violence?
Well, the first thing is we need a president that sets the right tone and explains to people why we need to be tolerant and respect equality. And I think that will help a lot. People's prejudices go away slowly, but you can provide institutional support so that communities have self-determination and are not oppressed and excluded by gatekeepers that discriminate against them. And so that goes for communities of color, immigrants, as well as LGBTQIA folks. We need to pass the Equality Act so that, all gender and sexual orientations are protected in our federal anti-discrimination laws. And that is a statement as well as a law that we can use to enforce equality. And in terms of the immigrants, I already said, those folks should be released given this COVID crisis. I'm for having open borders like they have within the European Union, where people can move freely across those borders. They just check in, get ID'd. If there's not a warrant out for them, go about your business. Shop, come for recreation, for work, or residence. And, some people say, well, then all the poor people in Mexico and Central America are going to come here. The Greeks could leave Greece, which is flat on its back, and they aren't pouring into Germany. They're still in Greece. Some Greeks go up there and they send remissions back home to the people in Greece, like Mexicans do when they come here to work. And that's fine. But, the border divides us as workers so that even if those people aren't here supposedly taking jobs, they're on the other side of the border being paid less and used as a threat against workers here. So that border divides the working class, and divide and conquer is what the bosses do. So the border is not in the interests of common people on either side of the border. So I'm for open borders, and we got to get rid of ICE and the Border Patrol, proven racist. You look at their Facebook pages, just abolish them and have a new immigration agency to administer this open borders policy. And the staff on those old agencies, they can reapply. And if, we don't find that they were racist and sadists, maybe they can come back to work in that new agency. But we got a clean house in the border agencies. And that gets into the police, but I'm getting off the question, so I'll stop there.
All right, I'm going to jump in here real quick, Robin. We're going to do one last question, and then we'll let Howie see if he has any prepared words. So if you have a question specifically that you wanted to ask or one that stuck out from you from the list, please take this opportunity.
There's so many good ones left, Howie. So I'll just ask this one last protection question. This comes from Ybor City. How important is protection of whistleblowers, auditors, and budget inspectors? What legislation, rules, and presidential actions would you propose to strengthen such protections? And I guess in the wake of, I think what's going to come down the line here, maybe after some investigation with COVID, I do find that a relevant question. So this person wants to know what would you propose to strengthen protections?
Well, there are laws on the books that are being ignored, and we got an administration that tries to out whistleblowers, like in the respect to the not the coronavirus, the Ukraine extortion attempt. And the first thing Trump wants to know is who did it and out them, which is the whistleblower laws are supposed to protect those people. So those got to be enforced. I think the president can set the right tone to encourage whistleblowers and know they'll be protected by giving pardons to all the whistleblowers that have been prosecuted under the Espionage Act, which is a very repressive piece of legislation going back to World War I. So that would include Julian Assange. It would include Chelsea Manning, who is now out after they put her back in jail for refusing to testify to the grand jury, but she has over $100,000 in fines. Those should be lifted. The president might could do that or could at least advocate for it. And then the person I would actually pardon and bring into the administration is Edward Snowden, who revealed that the NSA was spying on all of us. And it was a violation of our Fourth Amendment right to privacy. And I read his book. Everybody should read his book, Permanent Record, because it's a riveting account of how he came to decide what he did. And also what we need to do in this new age of electronic surveillance. And I think he has a good grasp on protecting our privacy and other fundamental democratic rights, and also doing the kind of intelligence gathering that we need to do, like finding out what's going on with the coronavirus in China. We know, according to the reports, that Trump was being told about this as far back as November. That's useful information. So I think Edward Snowden would be somebody that would be an asset to the administration. So I would pardon all those people, and I think that would set a tone so that whistleblowers could feel like, yeah, they could come forward. You read that book by Snowden, and he saw what happened to those others prosecuted under the Espionage Act, and he knew that he would not get a fair hearing. So he had to, go to the press and out of the country in order to get the information he wanted to blow the whistle on out. So that's what I would do with respect to whistleblowing.
Okay. Mr. Hawkins, we've appreciated your time with us. So to take this out, you have just won the election as President of the United States. And in maybe 60 to 90 seconds, tell us how you would address us in your embarking words.
Well, I think I'll handle that like I alluded to earlier, that I'm more likely to be the former Green Party candidate for president. We probably won't win the election, although we're ready if we do. But what I would be saying is to the people that we help mobilize around our Green New Deal, the Economic Bill of Rights, Medicare for all, student medical debt relief, cutting down the bloated military budget in these unnecessary wars and coups that we're involved in. That now we gotta go, whoever gets elected, go out into the streets and do mass nonviolent direct action, not little symbolic things or this orchestrated civil disobedience that happens too often, but disruptive nonviolent civil disobedience to put forward our demands. And that includes labor action, strikes, but also the kind of thing King called for in the Poor People's Campaign, where they're going to camp out in Washington, D.C. and be disruptive, non-violently, until Congress responded to their demands for an economic Bill of Rights. In the first 100 days, I think the odds are that's what we'll be doing. But if I'm president, I'll pardon those folks I just talked about. They'll get legislation on the Equal Socialist Green New Deal. I'll take whatever executive action I can. War Production Board during World War II, like I was talking about, we can do a climate protection board to begin doing whatever we can do exclusively through the federal government. And then just set a different tone for the country in that inaugural speech, saying that, we're all in this together, everybody counts, and, we're over with this divisive rhetoric we've had from the previous occupant of the White House.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Howie.
There are more questions left, and perhaps I can maybe put them on your page, and maybe you can address those folks that I did not get a chance to forward the question to, but we thank you for your time. Florida, thanks you so much for being with us.
And Howie, just in case, if someone wants to support your campaign, what do you need and where can they go to give it to you?
Well, most of all, we need people power. We need legs on a national campaign to reach the people. You know, through the mass media, we can only do so much. So go to howiehawkins.us, volunteer, we'll plug you in. You can say the kind of things you're able to do. Just sign up to get our bulletins. We tell you about the statements we're putting out and what we're doing, not just ask for money, but we do that. You can donate on the website. And there's lots of information on the website that will hopefully help people when they're, you know, doing their own campaigns and around candidates and issues where they live. So it's howiehawkins.us. That's the website. And thank you. I enjoyed speaking with y'all, and I just wish it could have been in person down there in Florida.
Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good day.
All right, you too.
All right, folks. I would like to take this opportunity to explain to everyone, remind everyone how our primary process will work. If you choose to vote in our primary, you will go to gpfl.org/vote. And there you will confirm that you are a green voter, fill out a little form, and we will respond with instructions on how you can cast your ballot in the Green Party of Florida 2020 primary. I once again want to thank all of our volunteers, our council, our board for all the hard work they put into the system. Once again, as a reminder, the state of Florida provides no support to primaries for so-called minor parties, while you see them mobilize hugely for the Democratic and Republican parties. So we're left to figure this process out on our own. As a sort of relief from that, the state puts forth that there are no rules regarding how we do our primary. The state law, the law of the state of Florida does allow the council of the Green Party of Florida to make that choice for you. But instead, they decided to put in all the hard work to make sure that we can do this democratically and make sure that all the literally thousands of voters in the state of Florida will have an opportunity to make their voice heard. And the council will be bound by that choice, and our delegates that we'll be sending to our national convention will have no discretion. They will be only giving the will of the voters here in the state of Florida. We are going to take a brief minute and a half, perhaps a 2-minute break here. We'll be playing a little video on repeat, so feel free to turn on the sound. We'll be back here in a few minutes with Dario Hunter. So thank you for joining us, and please stay tuned.
Babe.
We're still live. One moment here, please, Robin. All right. I am sorry about that there, Robin. I had locked the room while we were talking to Howie. So we will need to wait for Dario. Unfortunately, he may have tried to come in while we were locked. So perhaps if you have his phone number, can you give him a call? Maybe just mute your screen in your video. You are currently muted.
You mean just have him tell him to log back in?
And while we hammer out our technical difficulties, I will once again remind everyone that the location to vote in our primary is gpfl.org/vote. And Dario has arrived.
Yes.
So we'll let him get his audio and his video set up, and then we can begin part 2 of our presidential forum. Welcome, Dario. It's a pleasure to have you with us. It's great to see you again.
Great to see you as well. Thank you for having me.
Robin, you have the floor.
Yes. Once again, thank you, Mr. Hunter, for being with us. Once again, unfortunately, it's not in person where we can enjoy the sunshine down in Florida. This is a very unusual time for us all, as you know. But before we get into that, if you could please state your name, tell us, take about 90 seconds to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll start with the questions.
Absolutely. My name is Dario Hunter. I'm a candidate for the Green Party presidential nomination, and I'm originally from the great state of New Jersey, was raised in Newark, New Jersey, and Jersey City. We started out in the projects in Newark. My mother's African-American, my father is a Persian immigrant. And for me, education was the central focus of my young life. That's how I managed to get through Princeton and 3 law degrees, immigration, and career ultimately as an educator because I wanted to give back. I saw how much of an influence it had on my life, and I wanted to see that happen for others. So as a high school educator, I was a community college level educator, and I served as a member of the Youngstown, Ohio Board of Education. And that fight in regards to ensuring that students, particularly students of color in my community, receive an equal and fair chance to education, part of what motivates this choice to run, because I noticed it was very clear to me that the issues they were facing were national issues in terms of the breakdown of our educational system, national issues in terms of racism, educational, environmental, employment, and in many regards. And that's what motivates my run in this race. And the platform we put forward that really intends to speak as a voice for the voiceless in many segments of this society that go unheard. So there's only so much one can say in 90 seconds, but I'm looking forward to many purposeful questions about our platform and how we're going to find those solutions we all know that we need together.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think we have some really good questions. I'm going to ask you some of the same ones that I did ask Howie, and we try to keep it conversational. But we had some really good questions, and I do want to start with the first one as I did with Howie. The main reason why we're meeting virtually is because of, unfortunately, this pandemic. And as of this morning, I saw that the death toll was up to about 67,000, which is, I don't even have words for it. And so the first question is, and maybe a twofold question, because I'd like for you to talk about how African Americans are being impacted the most. But with 67,000 Americans dying, the fatality has been global. What steps would you take in investigating this pandemic? Ooh, thanks.
Did we lose Dario?
Um,
I see motion.
I am here.
All right. Did you hear the question, Dario?
Yeah, only half of it. Are you getting me through clearly?
It seems to be a
Getting
bit of
better.
freeze a little bit, but I can repeat it. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I'm going to respond to the question on the issue of the epidemic. Frankly, our campaign has the best problem. It is a domestic and a global problem. It is one in which this country really has not responded adequately. It hasn't been adequately, unfortunately, to the misery. And we have a full-throated plan in our comprehensive COVID-19 plan. And I encourage people to go to dariohunter.com to read the plan in full. But we would address it. A Hunter administration would address it. First and foremost, we all have to acknowledge that we needed to have Medicare for all to start with. Have public control, public.
Daria, we are having a lot of trouble with your stream.
Largesse.
I don't know if that background you're using is eating up a lot of bandwidth. Are you in an embarrassing situation, or is it possible to turn that off?
Getting you in and out. So I think what we're going to have to do is I'm going to switch to just audio by phone. If you'll bear.
Absolutely, Dario. We'll wait here for you. We apologize about the issue.
I'm going to do that. It just take one minute.
We understand. We apologize for the technical difficulties here, folks, but Dario will be right back. So, Robin, while we wait, we've got a little dead air time. While we wait for Dario to come back, why don't you tell us some of your biggest recollections from your trip up to Tallahassee?
And we're live.
We are currently live. We're waiting for Dario to come back, and want to give the people something to watch while we wait.
Yeah. So I think I had mentioned it when Howie was talking about.
This is Dario.
Oh, there he is.
All right, Dario, welcome back.
Okay.
We're sorry.
Thank
about
you.
that.
And I apologize for the delay, but you keep rolling with the punches. It happens. So the COVID-19 plan response. So as I mentioned, we have a comprehensive response to deal with this nationally and internationally, because we do recognize there's been a lot of suffering, and a lot of it has been unnecessary, unfortunately, because we should have had a plan in place already, and we should have had a stronger healthcare infrastructure and a stronger infrastructure in all regards. So yes, Medicare for all. I think we all acknowledge that. All Green candidates would acknowledge that. We needed to have that. We also need to have public control of the pharmaceutical supply and the medical supply. These shortages that we've seen, nurses wearing hefty bags for protection. I mean, it's obscene considering the amount of riches being hoarded in this country by the 1%, and it should not happen. We have some innovative features in our COVID-19 plan that other campaigns have taken notice of and incorporated. We have, for instance, $2K per person per month universal basic income. And that's to give relief to everyday Americans right now. It's very important to have that piece, and also making sure that we support no rent, no mortgage, no evictions during this crisis, no utility cutoffs. It's very important to ensure that we secure the stability of Americans financially in the midst of this crisis. Our plan also includes dealing with the fact that we have this broken infrastructure, these gaps in infrastructure, and we have Americans suffering and trying to heal through what is a medical catastrophe, and we still have food deserts in large parts of this country. Yes, we have those issues in urban areas like the south side of Youngstown, where I served as a public servant, a predominantly African-American area. We also have it in rural areas. We need to ensure that healthy food, produce, gets to communities. We need to ensure that communities have coverage in terms of adequate clinics and hospitals within reach, nearby. So we have to improve that infrastructure. We also have to ensure that we deal with the housing crisis in this country, which exacerbates problems like this. We have to not only mobilize to build more housing, but to make sure that properties that are owned by governmental entities are made available. And here in California, where I am presently, you have an effort to try to take over some of those properties. Squatters are taking over those properties in the midst of this crisis. And I applaud them, frankly. I mean, they've gone neglected for far too long. Some of our people who are unhoused on the streets actually served this country, and they answered when the call came. And unfortunately, this country has not been looking out for them. It's really an embarrassment, it's a shame, and it's unconscionable. We also have to talk about the international piece of this. In the midst of this crisis, you have Trump trying to pursue Maduro in Venezuela for drug trafficking charges. You have him ramping up sanctions against Iran, strangling that country that is suffering deeply from COVID-19. This must not be. We have to pursue the path that our campaign sets out towards peace, ending the military-industrial complex. We have to pursue that as a part of this crisis. Bring an end to that military-industrial complex, bring an end to U.S. imperialism, and work together peacefully and fruitfully with all of the countries of the world, shoulder to shoulder as equals, to ensure that we can not only resolve this crisis together, but that we can resolve all of the crises that face humanity and face this planet, such as climate change catastrophe, folks. We also have to turn our attention to free and fair elections and how this crisis impacts that. Unfortunately, signature requirements have always been the bane of our existence as a party, but they are more onerous in the midst of this crisis, where you cannot collect for signatures right now. And so those requirements have to be legally challenged, and frankly, they have to be thrown out in the midst of this crisis. I don't think really they should exist to begin with. You should have free access to the ballot for candidacies, okay? And of course, we have to deal with issues such as our pernicious immigration system. We have to end internal immigration enforcement in the midst of this crisis. As a whole, our campaign supports abolishing ICE and ending the abuses happening at our border. And we need to deal with how this is affecting our persons who are incarcerated at this time in the mass incarceration system, the new plantation system as it is. And we have to deal with the fact that they aren't being given adequate access to the means to protect their health, unfortunately. So I support efforts towards early release. We have some parts of this country that have unconstitutionally crowded prisons in any regard, including California. And so we have to make moves towards that effort as well. But the international piece, as you mentioned as a part of the question, is very, very important. And it's important that we do exactly what this administration is not doing, which is we actually turn to other nations equals and work together fruitfully, rather than amping up the saber rattling and the drumbeat of war to distract from the terrible response on the part of this administration as we've seen it so far. So once again, I encourage people to read our COVID-19 plan in full. It's available at dariohunter.com.
Thank you, Dario. You talked about a lot of dialogue there for more conversation. But something that sticks out that a lot of folks are facing is you talked about a universal basic income, and so we're seeing that the administration has released possibly a one-time $1,200 stimulus to citizens. But could you kind of take maybe about 90 seconds to talk about what your administration would do? Because do you think $1,200 is enough for folks that are in need during this time?
No, $1,200 is not enough. We all know it's not enough. Everybody involved in discussing this and producing this plan, everyone knows it's not enough. Look, I'm in Southern California right now. Where does $1,200 take you in Southern California? It's a fraction of rent. And unfortunately, this is really just, it's a ruse to make people seem like they're getting some support and some help from their government when they're really not. And the $2,000 a month is just a bump as well as a part of a comprehensive platform towards system change. $2,000 a month as a UBI is only going to go so far if you don't have that fundamental system change that takes care of rent control, for instance, that ends the oligarchy. And that's the ultimate aim for our administration. So we're doing more than just the $1,200 payment one-off thing. We're doing $2,000 a month per person, including the same amount for children. In the short term, Americans will feel that bump, but in the long term, what has to happen is for that to be more impactful as a part of an overall program, we need fundamental system change that ensures that we get housing available, fresh food available, right to food and water, right to housing, right to employment. All of those pieces have to fall into place, including rent control, because the rent is too high. All these people who are saying we are going to say no rent, no mortgage, no eviction, and then we're going to pick up the tab for the rent. So you are going to pay the pre-existing high rents with public money? Hell no. Hell no. We have to have rent control, and we can't be bailing out corporations without giving relief to Americans, not just in terms of cash payments, but in fundamental system change.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Both of you guys have given us a lot of fresh perspective on that. So moving on, we do have some questions, and I want to be sure and get some outside questions. There's one from our Facebook page, John McBroom from Lakeland, Florida. He asked, this is somewhat of a constitutional question, but he asked, do you support forming alliances with other progressive groups to get candidates elected to office at all levels of government?
Okay, I'm presuming by that question, it's really a question oriented towards our campaign and the Green Party forming those alliances with progressive groups. And absolutely, that's a part of what we're aiming to do as a campaign, and a part of our values involves working together with like-minded people to achieve the goals that befit our values. We have to do that. And that really speaks a lot to party building, because an important piece of party building is getting out of the box, reaching out to organizations that may not be aligned with the Green Party traditionally or aligned with any party, but are aligned with the causes we support and are working towards change, towards impactful change that speaks to our values. Black Lives Matter, for example. We need to ally with organizations that are going to move in the same direction with us towards those goals. And that's not just how we achieve those goals, but it's also how we bring people on board with the Green Party. It's how we grow as a party. It's how we grow in numbers and ranks. And it's an important piece of party building. It's something that, as a leader in my local, when I was the chair of the Mahoney County Green Party in Ohio, that was very important to me. And I also want to point out the fact that as a campaign as a whole, we believe in that in an international scale. We have to ally with progressive organizations. We have to ally with other countries. We have to build tighter connections and build bridges with anyone and everyone, even people we disagree with, even organizations and countries we disagree with, because the talking, the connecting, the building of bridges will allow us to work on the things that we do agree on. And it will allow us to grow together in a way that will change and transform our disagreements into collaboration. So that's very important. And I want to make one more point. It's important that we do it as equals. We can't, in a typical American fashion, parachute ourselves into other organizations, or in a geo-global scale, parachute ourselves in other countries, as this country often does, regime change. We jump in the middle of things and we say, this is how things are going to be done now. No, it has to be mutual consent, has to be mutual respect, and it has to be with equal places at the same table. It's the only way we're going to build and grow.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And so with that question, I think it would lead me to ask, this is a women's rights question, which and I asked Mr. Hawkins the same question. This is from Wendy Stimler of Melbourne, Florida, and she asked, now that Virginia has become the 38th state to ratify the ERA, what do you see as a path forward for women's rights, and what would you do as president to ensure gender equality?
Excellent question. It's been a long wait for the ERA, and it really does demonstrate something, unfortunately, about us as a country. I mean, it really shows how we're lacking in terms of the commitment to equality, to the gender equality. And I don't want to make it too much of a negative point. Let's stress the positive fact that we're moving in that direction, and it may be finally happening. And we all need to work together to ensure that that takes place. But there's so much more that needs to be done. We have to address the pay gap between women and men in the workforce, but also the intersectionality of oppression. We're looking at a workforce where Black women earn 61 cents to a white man's dollar, and that cannot stand. And so we have to not only beef up our addressing of those issues in terms of the mechanism we have for employment discrimination complaints. The EEOC, in my opinion, is broken and really needs to be fixed in terms of putting some teeth to their enforcement and the complaint process. That's one area. But we also need to encourage programs that encourage placement in the workforce, deal with complaints directly in terms of discrimination in the workforce, be they gender or racially motivated or a combination of all of those things. We also have to address the fact that we're experiencing a time and a place in which there's an attempt to roll back the gains made into protecting reproductive rights and reproductive choice. We have some states where you have state governors saying, you know, we're going to fight Roe versus Wade because, you know, God says so. And I believe very strongly in the separation of church and state, even though I happen to be a clergy person. And I believe very strongly in a woman's right to choose and that it is non-negotiable. And this is a part of our party's platform. It is something that our campaign is committed to fighting for on every front, you know, local in terms of state action as well as federal. And it is something we have to keep on our radar. There's also the issue of a lack of parity in terms of the placement of women in legislative positions. And other countries have turned more of their attention towards this issue to ensuring that there is equality in terms of placement in legislative positions, in our case in Congress, in state legislatures, on local boards. And so we as a party and we as a campaign want to encourage more women to be active and involved and engaged in politics and break down the barriers that prevent that from happening, because there's a great deal of sexism in our political system. So we have to fight against that. I'm also a strong supporter of what's been instituted in some other progressive countries of ensuring that there is equality in terms of boards for corporations. Now, the entire structure and how we approach corporations would be different under our administration from a socialist perspective, but also we still have to pay attention to the fact that in the workforce, governance in the workforce, as well as in our political system, there needs to be gender equality, gender parity, as well as diversity in other regards. And so we would be ensuring that through clear legislation, as well as through an effort to educate and reshape the workforce in this country. So the recap, we got multiple fronts here. We're talking about the ERA, yes. We also have to protect reproductive rights. We have to ensure that there are more women in the workforce, they're being paid and treated equally, more women in legislative positions, and more women on boards of corporations. These are some of the steps our administration would be turning its attention to and putting energy forward to ensure when we win the White House.
Thank you. The whole conversation around ERA is, I spent some time with a lot of ERA activists in Tallahassee, and one of the things that we tried to broaden that conversation on many angles, we're talking about going from reproductive rights to reproductive justice. But one thing you talked about, something that probed this question, but the mortality rate for Black women, this whole scientific racism, and I think Serena that kind of shed a little more light to this. What policies should be in place to ensure the safety of African-American women when they're hospitalized or when they're giving birth?
That's a great question. And that's an important issue to me, as well as securing the safety of Black women, of women of color in general, in all regards. Okay, so we have to have a better standard of care, for one thing, in terms of medical practice in this country. It has been shown in studies that medical practitioners would give less painkillers to minority patients, to Black patients, than to white ones. That's that's really sad and unfortunate and unconscionable. And knowing that that's the case, knowing that there is that discrimination, we have to reshape the standards of the profession as a whole. And we have to put in place clear benchmarks and clear disciplinary structures to ensure that that does not take place. That obviously affects the safety of Black women and all Black patients and patients of color in our medical system, and it would not fly under our universal healthcare system. We also have to deal with the fact that we have a crisis in this country of missing Black and Indigenous women. I'm going to say it again, a crisis of missing Black and Indigenous women. And that's a general safety issue. And part of the reason why it is a crisis is because our law enforcement does not care enough about it. That has to change. And through our Justice Department, we would ensure that law enforcement agencies are making this a priority. But of course, we're also going to be completely revamping policing in this country as a whole. It will not only be community control policing, but we're going to ensure that police officers are trained in a way in which they are problem solvers and not as they are presently, in effect, overseers for what is shepherding into the new new plantation system, the mass incarceration system. Okay, we have to completely change the paradigm, demilitarize the police, turn them into problem solvers rather than problem makers, in effect, and make it a Justice Department priority to ensure that we deal with crises such as this missing Black and Indigenous women. There's also a crisis in terms of transgender women of color, Black and Latinx. There's a tragic rate of murder for transgender women in this country, and overwhelmingly those who are murdered from year to year are women of color. That is an issue of women's safety as well. And that would also be a Justice Department priority for us. And when it really comes down to it, all of these things are unfortunately connected. Environmental racism, educational racism, workplace racism, racism in law enforcement, racism in terms of the lack of protection for Black women, racism in terms of the lack of parity in pay for Black women. We have a fundamentally structurally racist system. And we have to peel back all of the layers and address every single one of them all at once in order to root out the problem. And that's what our administration would be doing.
Thank you. A lot there. And thank you for speaking to our Native sisters, brothers, our Indigenous folks. Really appreciate that, because that was a question that was here. So you've kind of answered that. It's really a lot of heavy stuff. So I kind of want to, a question that I have an order that I'm going on to, but my phone, it keeps jumping. So I'm kind of like looking, but I see some really good, that had not been, that I did not ask Howie. This is a really good question that I think. How can we strengthen the postal system budget? How can we return to the post office, small banks being more accessible to individuals? I think with I've noticed a decline in that, and probably with COVID going on, I am concerned about our postal system.
I'm very concerned about our postal system too, and this is a question that connects to the last one, because we have a large Black workforce in the Postal Service, and those workers are not being treated right. Okay, I was privileged to serve on the Youngstown Board of Education with a colleague who is my senior in years and was a supervisor in the Postal Service years upon years ago, when that was a tough position to be in for a Black woman. And she discussed with me at length her struggles being in that circumstance. And those struggles continue. The mistreatment in the workforce, you know, the way that workers are treated from the upper hierarchy, and the unfortunate lack of resources in the closing of postal facilities, which is lessening the amount of jobs and, of course, negatively affecting communities. Going back to Youngstown once again, they closed a postal sorting facility in Youngstown, Ohio. And so if you wanted to send a letter from one side of the town to the other, they would actually ship it. They would truck it an hour and a half away to Cleveland, sort it in Cleveland, and then bring it back to the other side of town in Youngstown. A letter from one side of town to the next thereby took 2 days. They claimed it saved money, but in the end, all it did was end the convenience behind sending a letter and kill a lot of jobs. So we need to put resources back into the Postal Service as it is an essential service. Okay, we need to understand its role in the community, in the local community that it serves. It is not just a business, a corporate endeavor. It is a lifeline for people, even in this internet age. We have to protect the jobs of postal workers, you know, especially considering the discrimination aspect of all of this. We have to protect their jobs. And we have to ensure that we as a society take stock and take value in the Postal Service. And we can do that by the community building efforts that we are engaged in as an administration, which is a big part of our campaign. We're community building focused, being connected to ensuring that we have a robust postal service and that its services are considered as essential to the public as they need to be. Okay, so when we're dealing with essential services like the Postal Service, what we cannot allow is the backdoor privatization and corporate context for management and running of services such as the Postal Service. And because of their essential nature, they have to be treated like a public utility. And we as a campaign believe that utilities of any kind, essential services of pretty much any kind, need to be under public ownership, public management with local control and local say. And that will prevent circumstances like in the community of Youngstown where they just pick up and take off, get rid of a postal facility, kill the jobs, and impact people's ability to make fruitful use of postal services when communities have local say and choice and engagement.
Thank you. Again, a lot of topics there that we could lead from. So I'm gonna switch up the pace a little bit. I think it's still gonna be heavy. We've got they're coming for you with these defense questions. I have one in there too, but yeah, I think some really good questions. This one is like, I find like, wow. So Clark from Ybor City asks, would you prosecute the Trump, Obama, and Bush and Clinton administration officials for war crimes? I guess there's no there's no statute of limitations on them. Would you prosecute for war crimes?
Why stop there? I mean, there's a lot of war criminals that are out and about internationally. What about Netanyahu, for instance, just re-upped for another term as prime minister, managed to finagle that somehow. When it really comes down to it, we have to hold everybody responsible for the things that they've done that have caused people to be murdered anywhere in the world. You know, there are a lot of people that want to make the Obama administration the stuff of legend, and this has a particular issue for me as an African American, because part of that's often tied up with the idea of him being the first Black president. But fact, they had a drone war in Afghanistan, raining death from the sky. I don't support any of that. That's ugly, and it's murderous, and it really is criminal. Okay, and we have to call things what they are. We have to address them for what they are. We have to recognize that, yes, just about every administration, Democrat, Republican of recent memory, has engaged in war crimes, but they are not the only ones. They've got, air quotes, allies across the world that are working with them in making sure that war crimes happen, like in Israel, for example. And whatever efforts we can engage in internationally to ensure that people are held responsible through a process that involves due process, that is the right thing to do. That is a part of justice. It is a part of making whole a situation where people were fundamentally wronged. And no one should be afraid of that. We have a tendency as this country to we have a low institutional memory. You know, one administration to the next, we'll say, well, that was Obama, that was Bush, that was whatever. The rest of the world remembers. They lost their loved ones. They lost whole villages. They impacted the entire trajectory of countries in other parts of the world. Okay, we can't forget either, because it's what we did and are responsible for as a country. So yes, we do have to hold them responsible. We also have to change the international paradigm and our role in the world, because the rest of the world is looking at us as a toxic presence right now. And why wouldn't they? Because we've engaged in, air quotes, regime change, coups, bloody coups, We've engaged in all kinds of wars for profit. Look at what we're doing in Bolivia. Look at what we're trying to do in Venezuela. Look what we did decades ago in Chile, and what happened decades ago in my father's country, which is a different country now than the one that he left to come to the United States and be an immigrant, because of the trajectory set in place by US intervention and attempts to kill democracy there because it got in the way of their oil. We have to end all of that militarism and all of that capitalist profiteering and start building more fruitful relationships with the rest of the world. So we'll never have to question, is or isn't our president a war criminal? We'll know, because our system wouldn't allow that to happen in the first place.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's important, the militarism and all those intersectional issues. And unfortunately, I mean, I don't know if we could use the word war crime, but I definitely think that this administration is guilty of genocide with this recent COVID pandemic, and that's a whole nother conversation and topic. You've actually answered another question someone did ask. James asked, "Do you support ending all U.S. drone strikes?" So you've already answered that. So another question here is: defense is the largest discretionary spending program. Is this acceptable to your platform, and explain why or why not?
No, it's not. As I mentioned earlier, we're getting rid of the military-industrial complex, and there isn't going to be a military budget to speak of. We are drastically cutting that amount, that allocation, which produces war machines for raining death abroad. We're cutting a drastic amount of that allocation, and then what remains of that allocation will no longer be a military budget. It will be devoted to a department of peace. And instead of the president coming into office and having to sit at a table with all of these military leaders and saying, Mr. President, Ms. President, you have to do X, Y, and Z. We have to foment war here. We have to cause confusion here so we can make corporate profits here. Instead of doing all of that, we're just going to have a cabinet level meeting that's going to have the Department of Peace talk about how we can engage in improving quality of life across the world to end conflict, along with the Environmental Protection Agency talking about how we're going to protect the environment here and connect with other countries internationally to do that. We're going to have meetings that are productive, not destructive. War rooms instead of war room situations where we plan death for entire populations from a distance. That's going to be the difference for our administration. So no, it's not acceptable to have that kind of budget. It's not acceptable to use that money for what we've been using it for. And it isn't acceptable on an international scale. It's time we claim the real leadership as a country we need to have on an international stage. And that is showing leadership in peace building, shoulder to shoulder as equals with the rest of the world.
Thank you. So again, a little more topics about militarism, and I want to lead to some of the questions about race. We see this occupation, this militant type of occupation in our neighborhoods, and it opens up ways for other things to happen. So Robert Austin from Tampa asked, what are your views on stand your ground laws versus self-defense?
The reality of stand your ground laws is we know what has caused them to come about. And so no matter what explanation people give for them as necessary for self-defense, we know that they are part of the larger legal landscape that provides a roof, a cover for the white fear, white privileged fear that unfortunately motivates a segment of our population to engage in this kind of, on a local, personal scale, militaristic approach to other human beings. We shouldn't have a country where people have to constantly be in fear and are armed to the teeth. We do have constitutionally a Second Amendment, but if you look at the history of engagement with guns, gun ownership, if you look at the history of it, it unfortunately has, as a history, an intertwining with control, subjugation, and ultimately murder of Black people and people of color in general. Is that to say that that's the goal of all gun owners? Absolutely not. There are white gun owners, there are Black gun owners, but there is a certain segment of our culture that engages in not just their own personal actions, but legal landscape actions, legislative actions to justify a culture of fear that has murderous results. Of course, a key example is the Zimmerman case and the response to that case, the racially polarized response to that case, which underlined that fear. And so we need to address that as a country. We can't gloss over it and say, well, that's Second Amendment issue. Well, that's people's rights. Well, we need to. There is underneath that so many layers of hate that need to be addressed. And I have to address the issue in a larger scope of gun control. You know, prior Green candidates have talked about the simple measures we can take to help protect communities and help protect the nation as a whole. For instance, ending loopholes like private sales, gun show sales, for instance, dealing with the issue of liability on the part of gun manufacturers. And as a lawyer, that's something that definitely appeals to me, ensuring that there is that liability piece there. And of course, empowering communities. You know, there's so many ways in which our system as a country could improve if we were able to empower communities and take away this constant effort to preempt communities' choices, whether it's in terms of education or in terms of banning fracking in their community, or in terms of a city like Chicago that wants to institute certain controls on behalf of its citizens. And cities like that will end up facing state preemption of one form or another, okay? So we have to support communities when they make clear choices that they feel are democratically best for their communities. And we must be honest. We must be honest about the undercurrent of racial fear and hate that motivate some actions in regards to this issue.
Thank you. I'm going to turn the corner here just a bit, talk a little bit about environment. Of course, all of this goes hand in hand. All the issues that you brought up, violence, gun violence, it perpetuates to the decay of our environment. But a little more specific, this is a question that I asked Howie. It came from our Facebook group. This is from Joni from Florida, and she says that. I believe every Green should watch the movie Planet of the Humans. And I would love to hear what she wants to hear your thoughts or think about it in terms of our own eco-socialist Green Deal. What are your thoughts about that in relation to the movie?
I cannot say I've seen Planet of the Humans, so I won't pretend that I've seen that movie. I have not. But if we're talking in a general scope about the relationship between human beings and a larger ecosystem, when we talk about the Green New Deal or any environmental platform, we do have to keep in mind what the big picture is. What is our place? What is our place in the world? Is it our place to have, as some might say from a religious perspective, and I don't believe in the melding of religion and politics, but unfortunately a lot of politicians in this country do, and that's a real shame. That's what's corrupted our system to a certain degree, that mankind has dominion over the earth. And what comes from that is this negative idea that we can just use it any way we want. We can pollute it, we can do whatever we want to animals, to fragile habitats, ecosystems. And what we're finding out is that the effect of that is not only very negative to our planet, it catches up with us. The things we do to the fragile ecosystems around us because we live on the same planet catch up to us. Whether the pollution in our backyards causes cancer, or the things that we do increase CO2 in a way that causes global warming, we are experiencing as human beings the effects, the consequences of our actions. And so we need to recognize our place. We need to be humble. And I want to give a clear definition for that because people misunderstand it often. It doesn't mean that we put ourselves in a lowly place, although we do need to lower ourselves a bit in terms of the ugly things we're doing on this planet. It means that we understand the precise place that we are supposed to occupy. That we take no more, but we also take no less. We haven't gotten there yet as humanity, folks. We are taking a lot from the earth. And much like the children's book, The Giving Tree, the earth is trying hard to keep up. The earth is trying hard to be accommodating and heal nonetheless, but we are still taking. And so we have to listen to the earth. We have to stop doing the things we're doing that are killing it, whether it's the actions we take that increase CO2. You know, we've seen in the middle of COVID-19, skies in places like LA have started to clear up a little bit. The Earth's trying to heal from the effects of what we're doing. We need to end our use of fossil fuels and the extraction of fossil fuels, and that's a central theme of the Green New Deal, and it's important that we do that. That's part of how we occupy our place. But our campaign is talking about aspects of that no other campaign is talking about. We need to treat animal life on this planet better. We need to end the rapacious effects of big ag and the overconsumption, the overproduction of meat, because that has a key effect upon climate change as well. We are reaping what we sow, so to speak, in that regard. We are experiencing the effects of our mistreatment of animal life in that regard. And so all of these things that we talk about, you know, ending the use of fossil fuels, bringing down meat consumption and production, ending plastic pollution. We're seeing plastic in the deepest of ocean trenches right now. It also affects CO2. All of those things are part of how we as human beings dial back and seek to occupy our proper humble place in the balance of the planet. And the fact that we as a party together are seeking that as a goal is a part of what makes me very proud to be a Green and proud to be a candidate in this race.
Thank you. So I'm gonna there's some questions from our YouTube viewers that I think is really important to get in. And you said a lot of important things about Green New Deal situation, and we know you know, I guess, you know, AOC had some revisions, or we know it was, some say it was co-opted. That's another time, another place conversation. However, the platform is important, and I think this is a really important question. Sean Bennett from Jacksonville asked, I'm sure basically if you were president or even have another seat in office, how do we get Congress to work? How do you get Congress to work with you on the Green New Deal?
That's a great question, because I've heard a variety of versions of that question before, but still not as often as I would have liked, because people don't often think about how does this work to have a Green president with a Congress that would not be. You know, even if all our Green candidates won, we wouldn't have enough Greens in Congress to have Green control of Congress alongside a Green presidency. So what you would have is a Green president that has to work with both the Democrats and the Republicans. And so you will have to broker, you will have to work to make compromises, but you will also have to do what people do in politics, which is put pressure. You'd have to put pressure on both of them. Although you probably get more gains out of that pressure and get closer to your objective out of doing that with the Democratic Party. And that would mean using the bully pulpit of the presidency to its full effect. And that would be a very powerful position to use indeed, because you can shape public opinion that way. And that unfortunately cuts both ways, because, you know, when Trump says something totally idiotic, you know, people go out, unfortunately, and either do it or think that it might be real. You know, take, for instance, questions about whether or not injecting bleach or sanitizer could actually work to protect them against COVID. You know, the president says something, and a certain segment of society may actually run with it. Mm-hmm. It's a very powerful position to be used for good. That's the intent. It should be used for good, to shape public opinion and shape public understanding, especially in a society where perspectives are the ones that we're advancing don't really get out to public consciousness. We have a media blackout. We have a corporately controlled media. They want to keep the party going in terms of polluting this planet. And the messaging is that what we're putting forward is completely off base. And the watered down Green New Deals, plural, you know, that's a little too radical too, but at least it's closer to something sensible than what the Green Party is putting forward. That's the kind of messaging they want to put forward. The presidency can be a powerful bully pulpit to influence Congress and make people stand up and say, you know what the president's saying is right. I'm going to call my congressperson, and if they're not supporting this, I'm going to hold their feet to the fire. We have seen town hall meetings where people have bombed town hall meetings in a metaphorical sense by just showing up in groups, and every single person who gets asked, who gets called on to ask a question, asks, for example, are you going to support Medicare for all? Next person gets up, are you going to support Medicare for all? Next person gets up, are you going to support Medicare for all? that happened from a concerted effort, a concerted, organized effort. And so there will have to be a certain amount of that alongside the brokering and engaging in fruitful discussions for compromise with the other parties. That is the realistic political landscape of what a green presidency would have to look like. But we would have to also be careful to maintain that balance to not give up our ideals. There are certain things that we cannot sign off on and we just cannot support. And this system cannot continue the way that it continues. It cannot continue to be a corporatist, abusive system. And so we would have to, with the help of public opinion and the help of pressure, drag this system towards the fundamental change that we need. That would take a very strong-willed person. Indeed, it would have to take a very strong-willed person to change fundamentally the way this system is shaped. And I can tell you from my personal experiences, not just from my activism and my leadership, in elected office, but just the life that I've led. I come from an experience and a life where, like Fannie Lou Hamer, I am sick and tired of being sick and tired. As a Black person in this country, as a gay man, as a child of an immigrant, as all of the things that this country says shouldn't be anywhere near the halls of power. And I got the thick enough skin to weather all of the, not just brokering, but slings and arrows that will be involved in that kind of circumstance. And so I'm ready for that. That's what it would take and what it would require. And that's what I believe I have in terms of character.
Yeah, thanks. A lot to that. And so with that being said, I encourage other folks that have green entered, so to speak, and present greens, that we try to that we run for those offices, that we try to obtain those seats that where we can impact legislation, in part policies such as the Green New Deal outlines, so that we can definitely dismantle all of these injustices. So I think we're at the 10-minute mark, just to let you know. Our other chair may come in to just remind us. But also, here's another question. I want to frame it a little bit different. This is from Mike T from YouTube, to make sure that it lands correctly, so that we can have really good dialogue around this COVID situation, as everyone has talked about. Is going to impact our elections, is going to impact voting. We're already seeing some voter suppression, all kinds of things. But Mike T wants to know, what are your thoughts, or do you think it was Russia who rigged the elections in 2016?
No, I don't believe in any of that garbage about Russiagate. And we have right now COVID-19, you're correct, that's affecting our current electoral situation, and we have to ensure that as a party and just as citizens as a whole who are interested in protecting democracy. And you can't see me right now, but I'm doing air quotes for democracy, because our system really is, unfortunately, an oligarchy. We have to fight to get to real democracy, but we have to protect what little semblance of it we have as citizens in the midst of this. And that means legal challenges to ensure that we have the full choice that we should be having in this election, and that these signature requirements, which really shouldn't be in place to begin with, shouldn't hamper the ability of having those choices when you really can't get signatures. And that's very important. No, I don't believe in the Russiagate hoax at all. Sorry. And I think there's so many things happening right at home that hoax distracts people from. For instance, electronic voting machines that are bogus, the fact that we have racist voter ID laws on the books, the disparity in terms of Black voters, minority voters, created and engineered by pernicious legislative means. God forbid people should pay attention to that, and that should be an endless loop of discussion on CNN or MSNBC or all these other channels, as it should be. But instead, they're going to move that off of the headlines, and they're going to talk about Russiagate. No, doesn't fly with me, doesn't work with me. We have to address the democratic deficit, folks. We have to address it in full. We need ranked choice voting, yes. And you mentioned supporting candidates. I want to give a shout out to some candidates, Darnella Wade in Minnesota, Toya Woodward, both two strong Black women, strong women of color who are doing it in Minnesota. So look out for them, make sure to support them. Make sure to support Lisa Savage in Maine. And that's to tie into ranked choice voting, because she has a great opportunity there with ranked choice voting in Maine, a great opportunity. So please support her race. We need proportional representation, folks. We need to end the influx of corporate money into politics, public only financing. That's how they keep this system going, this rigged system going. We need to bring down that circus tent on this political system and have it really under the control of the people. We need open debates, folks. It's very crucial that we have that. And we've been fighting as a party for that for quite some time, so people can see and survey the real range of choice that they have as Americans. And I feel like spokes off of a wheel, all these other things connect to the democratic deficit, which is motivated by the efforts of the oligarchy to control this system for profit. And so we need to end that. We need to bring that down. That's what I'm focused on. I'm not going to be distracted by CIA talking points, DNC talking points, or any other hoaxes trying to keep people from looking behind the curtain on this broken democracy.
All right, Robin. Dario lost a couple minutes because of our technical difficulties, so let's give him one more question, and then we can give him a little time to say what he would like to say to the public.
Okay. Yeah, I think we'll segue from that. Yeah, the whole Russia thing, and it kind of was a slap in Black people's face. There was an article by Adam Peck that kind of perpetuated that it misled Black people, but Black folks knew that the Clintons had perpetuated mass incarceration and tons of other stuff. So this question is the same question I asked Howie. 1986 drug bill was instituted, different sentencing guidelines for two different forms of the same drug, cocaine. Could you talk about cocaine sentencing disparities and how you would handle that?
Yes, they're racist. They are racist. And it's a part of a larger legal framework that has at its purpose. I'm not saying it just coincides with, I'm saying it's engineered, people. It intends to ensure that whichever way possible, you can continue to maintain a bloated incarceration system that is predominantly Black, predominantly incarcerated persons of color, and so that they can feed into what is the new slavery. Slavery has not ended, folks. We need to realize that. It has just changed shape and changed forms, changed from the form of slavery that you are accustomed to hearing about in school textbooks to sharecropping to a variety of different shape shifts. And the incarceration system is a part of that. So simple answer, we're ending the war on drugs. We're decriminalizing. And we are treating addiction as the medical issue that it is. If you have addiction, we're going to treat addiction. But what we are not going to do, folks, is to use this bogus war on drugs to feed into mass incarceration. And there are a number of things that are feeding into mass incarceration that we need to cut off the lifeline for, whether it is the war on drugs, or it is decriminalization of sex work, which we do not believe in as a campaign, or it is the school to prison pipeline, folks, another feeder for Black people into the incarceration system. I will never forget, my first year on the board, the young Black women that came from our high school to speak to us and told us that their school felt like it was a prison. The presence of cops in that school and the way they felt treated by that presence, the cameras at every corner, it felt like it was a prison to them. And I believe strongly that that's what we're seeing in school buildings all across this country. I know it because I've done the investigation, the legwork. We're seeing this where they are creating little prisons out of school buildings to prime our children, unfortunately, for the new plantation system that is mass incarceration system. It has to end, folks. So to directly answer that question, we're ending the war on drugs, we're bringing that big tent down. But it connects to a lot of larger issues, the larger scope in this country of the system we have in place to systematically racially abuse a segment of our population and funnel them through certain channels for profit, for slave labor. And that has to end.
Thank you. So once again, I want to thank you before we close is to thank you. And again, Mr. Hawkins, for being with us. And again, we are saddened that this is not in person, so that we could give you that wonderful Florida hospitality that we enjoy, that we so enjoy doing. So if you'd like to just wrap up the last 90 seconds about how folks can support your campaign, where they go to donate, and just all those wonderful things about yourself.
Absolutely. And I want to thank you for your hospitality in a virtual sense. Thank you so much for having me. You know, I and my running mate, Darlene Elias, another strong person of color, a Latinx activist for social justice. You know, we're very proud to be running this campaign that aims to give a voice to the voices in so many regards. And hopefully that showed through the answers that you heard to all the wonderful questions you gave us. So if you want to learn more about our campaign and our platform, you can visit dariohunter.com. You can also sign up to our email list. You can sign up to volunteer there. And we wish that money wasn't a part of politics, but in the present system, as it happens, it is. So every little bit that you can provide helps. And you can also donate through our website at dariohunter.com. And once again, a reminder, please do check out our COVID-19 plan, our comprehensive COVID-19 plan. There's a brochure all about that at dariohunter.com. So thank you once again for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dario, I'm going to ask you to hang out here for a couple minutes after the stream is over. There's something I need to talk to you about that is slightly technical. So I'm
Sure.
going to give everyone once again the information on how they can engage in our primary, and then we'll bring the stream to an end, and we can have a discussion afterwards. So you've had a chance to meet both of our candidates for our president. We've got Dario Hunter and Howie Hawkins. David Roll was not able to attend this event. If you care to join vote in our primary, you'll need to be a registered Green voter by May 5th, which is 3 days from now. You can change your registration or register to vote online at the Florida Division of Elections. Furthermore, once you are a registered Green voter, you can go to gpfl.org. The link should be in the comments. And from there, gpfl.org/vote. And from there, you will be able to register for our ballot, and we will get you a voting code and send you over to where the balloting will be done. We'd like to thank you for joining us this evening. We'd like to thank Dario and Howie for taking time out of their busy schedules. And we are going to be signing off. If you are a member of the council or the board, we invite you to join us back in this Zoom meeting so we can have a little celebration. All right. Good night, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us.